In this educated video, I want to walk through solving inequalities. So this is an inequality here that you have on your in-class assignment. So this is going to be on in-class assignment number 13. If you don't have a paper copy of this, or if you're working at home, this is also posted in iTunes U under week 28. That's post week 28, day 2. So I go ahead and recommend open up that in-class assignment in another app. If you would rather work on your iPad, or get out the paper copy that I gave you in class, and write these notes down as you go. And if you get to a point to where you don't understand something, make sure you email me, or if you're in class, raise your hand and ask me, and I'll explain it to you one-on-one. So there are a few properties. You may be asking yourself, well, it looks like everything that we've done up to this point is exactly the same as if this sign here, the symbol, right here, it's the greater than symbol. But right now, all you've seen is it looks like we're doing the exact same thing as if there were an equal sign here. And that is true up to this point. But there are a few operations that you have to remember, which I've tried to include those in some of the example problems in your homework, which we'll talk about later. But now I've given you this quadratic. And I'm asking you to solve for x. Okay, it's a quadratic, but it's an inequality. But lucky for you, you're going to use almost exactly the same strategy that we used when we were solving quadratics that had an equal sign here. So let's go through that step-by-step procedure that I gave you when we were solving quadratics that were equations and not inequalities. So step 1. Write the quadratic in standard form. And I put the standard form here in quotation marks because this just looks like standard form. I don't know if you would actually call it that for an inequality, but just that way you can see that it's exactly the same process that we had when we were solving quadratics before. Let's go ahead and write it this way. And I'm actually asking you to solve this quadratic by factoring here. Okay, I'm actually explicitly asking you, solve this quadratic by factoring. Now, you could solve this by completing the square, but we're going to do that tomorrow or in some other problems. But right now, I want you to solve this quadratic by factoring. So let's go through this step-by-step process. Now, what I recommend, right before I get to a step, pause the video and see if you can do the step on your own first and then check your answer. That's the best way to learn this. So let's see. Step 1 says write the quadratic in standard form. Identify a, b, and c. So if I want to write this quadratic in standard form, I write x squared plus 3x greater than 10. Now to get this 10, okay, I need to get this 10 to the other side because you can see that all of my terms are on one side of the equation. And remember, this is how it needs to look when I am solving quadratics by factoring. So if I need to get that 10 on the other side, I subtract 10 from both sides. Subtract, oh, that was a horrible 10. That's just terrible. All right, let's try that again. 10, subtract 10. And then what we get, of course, here, the 10 minus 10, that just cancels out and leaves me with 0 on that side. And there's nothing on this side. There are no like terms that would go with 10. So I end up just getting x squared plus 3x minus 10 is greater than 0. So now you can see I've got all of my terms on one side of the inequality and I have a 0 on the other side. Now the next step is to identify my a, b, and c. What do you think? What are a, b, and c? Yeah, so hopefully you were able to see that the a is the coefficient of the squared variable term. So I look here, here's my squared variable term. What number's in front of that? In this case, it's going to be a 1. And I do the same for my x. My b is the number in front of my x. So I find my x. There it is. I look at the number in front of it. It's a 3. So I write 3 here. 3. And then my c is the constant. That's the number without a variable. And here, in this case, it's negative 10. Don't forget that negative. Negative 10. Okay? Now, at this point, you may be thinking, God, you hate factoring so much. Ain't nobody got time for that. Well, unfortunately, you do got time for that because you're in my class, and there's always plenty of time to work on these problems in class. So just keep going forward. Keep pushing through. You're doing a good job. You're getting this problem knocked out. Let's go to the next step. Step number 2 says multiply A and C together. So I go back. My A is 1, my C is negative 10. And so we get negative, let's do 1 times negative 10. And I get negative 10. So hopefully this is just review for many of you. Now we've got our A times C. So I take my A times C in step 3, find two numbers which multiply to produce the number in step 2, but add to produce B. Be careful with your signs. So I take my A times C, I get negative 10 here, and I ask myself, what numbers can I multiply together to get 10? Now, let's forget about the negative for right now. Let's just focus on the 10. What numbers can I multiply together to get 10? Yeah, so I'll do 1 and 10. Start there. 2 and 5. And let's do... Well, actually, that's it. No, those are only two pairs. Now I need to ask myself, which of these two pairs can I combine in some way to get my B? And my B here is 3. So which of these two numbers can I combine in some way to get 3? Yeah, so you probably got that. So when we're looking for which pair can be combined, that is added or subtracted to get B, hopefully you're able to say that it's going to be 2 and 5. Now, how do we combine those to get that 3? Well, we need to do 5 minus 2. So we need a negative 2 there. Now let's check. 5, positive 5 times negative 2. Does that give me negative 10? Yes, it does. So that's one restraint that is fulfilled, and then 5 minus 2, that will give me my B, which in this case is positive 3. So I come over here, just to clarify, negative 2 and 5. Now we go on to probably what I think is the part that you guys struggle with the most, and that's going to be rewriting. So step number 4, rewrite the quadratic, but replace the middle term with two terms using the two numbers from step 3. So our two numbers from step 3 are negative 2 and 5. So I'll just jot those down over here, negative 2 and 5. And we want to rewrite the quadratic, but replace the middle term with two terms using the two numbers from step 3. So I go back to my quadratic. Here's my quadratic inequality. I find my middle term. That's what I'm referring to, the 3x here. The term that has the variable that is not being squared. And I want to rewrite this term using these two numbers. So you can see that even when it's an inequality, you see, here's an inequality. It's exactly the same process up to this point as we were solving quadratics when there was an equal sign here. So if I want to rewrite this 3x, I just carry down my x squared first, x squared, and I know that I want to do 3x. So how can I obtain 3x using these two numbers? Well, I'll do positive 5x, and then plus negative 2x, because a positive plus a negative, that's going to give me a negative. So we'll do negative 2x, and then we haven't changed our negative 10, so we bring that on down here, negative 10, and then all of this is greater than 0. Now we want to use the grouping technique to factor the expression on the left-hand side. So this next step is just showing you what you group together. So in this case, I'm grouping together the first two terms. That's why I have parentheses here. So all you have to do is just write the x squared here, the 5x here, negative 2x there, negative 10 here. So we go x squared plus 5x, and then negative 2x. And be careful here, there's a minus sign here. So minus 10. Okay? Now, we are using the grouping technique to factor this. So, what I need to do in the next step is I need to factor out something. That's why I have this blank here. So I'm factoring something out of my first expression in parentheses, and then there's a blank here, and I'm factoring out something from my second set of parentheses. So let's see. Let me ask you, what is the greatest common factor of this expression in parentheses? So hopefully you were able to say that the greatest common factor here, it's not going to be 5 because there's not a number, there's not a 5 here, and there's not a number that 5 can go into evenly. But remember, the greatest common factor doesn't always have to be a number. It can be a variable. In this case, you ask yourself, is there an x in each term in the parentheses? And yes, there is. There's an x, and there's an x. Then you choose the one with the lowest exponent. And in this case, here's an x squared, there's an x to the 1, so I want to factor out and just an x here. So I go to my next slide. I want to factor out just an x. Or you could think about this as being a 1x, but you really don't have to have that 1 there. Just an x is fine. So if we want to figure out what goes into this first blank, I need to divide this term by whatever it is that I'm factoring out. So if I want to figure out what goes in the first blank, or the first blank inside the parentheses, I do x squared divided by whatever it is that I'm factoring out, and I get x squared over x. That's the same as saying x. 2 minus 1, should be a minus sign there, which is equal to x to the 1. So my first term in parentheses is going to be an x, and then I do the same thing for the second term. So what do you think? What's going to go, or what's going to be my second term inside these parentheses? So hopefully you were able to say that you need to take your original term, which in this case is positive 5x, and you need to divide it by whatever it is that you're factoring out, which in this case we're factoring out an x. So I do 5x divided by x is equal to, I've got x over x, those cancel out, and I'm just left with a 5. Okay, so we can know that we're going to have a 5, a positive 5. That goes in here, and then in the next set of parentheses, okay, we've got a negative 2x and a negative 10. What do you think? What is the greatest common factor of this part, this second part in parentheses? So hopefully you're feeling pretty comfortable with this, and if I'm moving a little fast, make sure that you raise your hand and you ask me questions. But we've been working with this so much that I feel like I can move a little bit faster with this process. So hopefully you said that we need to factor out a negative 2 from this expression. We're not going to factor out an x because if I ask myself, is there an x in each term? There's not. There's only an x in this term, so I can only factor out an x from the first term. So x is not part of the greatest common factor, but negative 2 will go into negative 2, and negative 2 will go into negative 10 evenly. So let's try factoring out negative 2. Now, to figure out, let me go ahead and write this in here so I don't forget. So negative 2 there. Now to figure out what my first term here, what my first term inside the parentheses is going to be, what do I need to do? Yeah, so hopefully you were able to say that we need to divide this first term by whatever it is that we're factoring out. So we've got negative 2x. Now I am going to do this in a different color just that way you can see my work because it's going to get a little cramped, but I need to divide that first term by whatever it is I'm factoring out. So negative 2x divided by negative 2. I've got negative 2 over negative 2. Those just cancel out, and I'm left with an x. So my first term is just going to be an x. Now I go back and I ask myself, what is the second term going to be? Yeah, and it was this exact same process. So I'm going to write this also in green. I've got negative 10. I'm factoring out a negative 2 from this, so I need to do negative 10 divided by negative 2, and that's equal to, so a negative divided by a negative, that gives me a positive, and 10 divided by 2, that's going to be 5. So my next term is going to be a positive 5 there. Now we're not done yet. There's still another step that we need to do. We need to finish factoring this and then solve for our unknown variable. Now I want you to try this on your own before watching the solution in the next Educated video. But go ahead and try this on your own, and after you finish your attempt for finish factoring this and then solving for your unknown variable, then watch the next Educated video.